After much off-season chatter, Martin Truex ends up going to Hendrick to drive the 5 car. This is a huge get for Hendrick, as he and Dale Sr. have really been getting into it for the role of top Chevy team. It takes a bit for the connection to start bearing fruit, but a strong close to the regular season gets them some wins at Pocono 2 and Michigan 2, which locks them into the playoffs, and he finishes towards the middle of the chase field. Like, this year everyone was just crazy in the chase. At first, things seem really good for the Dale Jr. team as well, as after yet another Daytona 500 close call, still no wins in his 13th try, and they're already starting to frame it like that in his blank number tries, so they're really leaning into it. He strings together a great regular season, finally getting his first win in exactly 4 years at the first Richmond race, and actually holding the points lead for the first time since he won the title in 2004 after the Brickyard. He'd comfortably make the chase. However, the last part of the season would not be kind to him. He would suffer an undiagnosed concussion at a Kansas tire test in August, and then a second one after getting caught up in Talladega 2's big one. He would be replaced by Regan Smith for a couple of weeks, and would then come back to finish out the season. The last place chase finish almost feels like an afterthought at that point, as he would have a lot to think about going into next season. Regan would actually perform pretty well in the few races that he gets with the 88 team. He was running well at Charlotte 2 before the motor goes, and then he would bring it home at Kansas to get a top 10 finish. This run would be good enough to get Regan a ride in Dale Jr.'s Nationwide Series number 7 car for next year, and to basically be Hendrick's fill-in guy for the next few years. Now, in real life, Casey Kane was already signed with Hendrick for the 2012 season, early in the 2010 season. However, I think he'd be getting a lot of attention from both Hendrick and Earnhardt, and while Earnhardt wouldn't be able to get both Truex and Kane on the payroll, Casey would end up signing with DEI for the 2012 season, and not only would he have the best season of his entire career, but the best season at DEI since Dale Jr.'s 2004 championship win. Kyle would have a relatively strong first half of the season, holding a spot safely in the chase through the Coke 600, but then he'd fall off hard. Only 1 top 5 and 5 top 10s the rest of the season would leave him just barely outside the chase, falling to Jeff Gordon. Once the chase starts, Kyle turns it back on and gets 6 top 5s in the chase that he missed out on. He finishes as the highest non-chase driver, and hopefully this serves as momentum for next season. Jeff Burton has 2 top 5s all season long, both of the Daytona races. Other than that, nothing. He is a total non-factor all season, a far cry from where the 3 cars should be racing at, and there's already talk of him retiring. Kevin Harvick has become the model of consistency, with only 3 finishes outside the top 20 for the entire season, with the 2 in the regular season coming from restrictor plate races. He stays that way through the chase and scores a win in the season's penultimate race, but consistent 11th place finishes don't really win you the championship. Menard is a similar but slightly worse way, making a home for himself in the 13th to 18th place range, and finishes 16th in points. Not much to talk about with Paul. He is just there at the end consistently. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now entered the Circle Sport era. I'm not going to bring these guys up too much, as they kind of just existed for like 7 years and then disappeared. For most of the season, Stephen Light is going to be getting most of the work, but occasionally, and this is why I'm bringing them up, Childress would field them as a 4th team, and in one of those starts, Austin Dillon would get to ride in that 33 car. He would finish 24th in the one race that he starts with them, which would be better than anyone else driving a Circle Sport car that season. Jamie McMurray doesn't have a huge improvement over last season, but he at least manages to make it to the finish line more often this season. So he at least competes for a top 20 points position, and that's apparently enough for Chip Ganassi to re-sign him on a multi-year extension. So as for this 01 car, I do feel like David Rudiman didn't really get a fair shot after the 00 kind of just dumped him. The only problem is by the end of this season, the 01 car is going to start having sponsorship problems. The U.S. Army is about to pull out of there. So they're going to have to string together a few one-race sponsorships just to keep the wheels on for this team. David kind of knows at this point that this is probably his last real shot in a decent ride, so he's going to go kind of boom or bust. I would imagine a lot of DNFs this season, but also a weirdly high amount of top fives, and maybe even one crazy win. Like, a top 20 in points would not be too crazy. 2012 was the year that MWR finally got their act together and started being good at this whole racing thing, thanks in large part to the addition of Clint Bowyer, who won twice in the regular season and kept it going during the playoffs. He might have had a shot at winning the title if he didn't start a damn riot in the Phoenix race at the end of the season, but still, by MWR standards, a runner-up points finish might as well be 5 championships at once. This is an interesting case right here because MWR, across the board, was really improving at this time. Like, Ambrose was kind of close to getting a chase berth in the 9 car in real life. Like, do you think this 56 car could net him, I don't know, maybe like 40 more points across the regular season? If you do, then I think that he might be able to make the chase. Also, I know I've been making a lot of assumptions that people in new cars would still win the same races that they did in old cars, but honestly, you could put Marcus Ambrose in a Fisher-Price trike and he'd still probably win Wackett's Glen. For the 6th consecutive season, the racing bug hasn't left Mark Martin yet. So he runs his normal 24-race schedule part-time with Michael Waltrip Racing this year, with Mikey filling him for him at the restrictor plate races, and Brian Vickers left to pick up the scraps. You'd think that such an inconsistent rotation of drivers would hurt the team, but it worked out surprisingly well for all 3 drivers, as they would finish 15th in the owner's standings, even with this little hodgepodge going, and even with Michael Waltrip being a contributor. Another solid season for Kasey Kahne as he's running in or near the top 10 most weeks, or having a really bad day. He's kind of inconsistent in that manner. He's able to make the chase as a wild card driver, but a fairly lackluster chase puts him near the bottom of the playoff contenders, but Kasey Kahne is still putting out good numbers. Kyle Busch finally does something that he hasn't done in his entire time with DEI, have a solid chase while actually being in the chase. He easily makes the chase with several wins, and even though he doesn't win in the chase, 5 top 5s and only 1 non-top 15 points finish nets him his first top 5 as a DEI driver. Dale Jr., he's in a quandary. Like, he signed with Hendrick through 2017, but now he's starting to doubt he made the right decision. He had way more success and honestly way more fun while he was racing with his dad, and maybe he wants to go back. He broaches the subject to Hendrick multiple times over the season, and there's a ton of reports during pre-race shows about his desire to go back to DEI. Now, at first, Hendrick blocks it all out, but if Dale struggles to make the chase, which I think all this drama may cause to happen, combined with the fact that Junior's time with Hendrick has largely been a bust, he could start exploring some options, and reports leak that he's taken a few meetings with Dale Sr. The biggest change for Martin Truex Jr. is that he is not involved in Spingate. We'll get to that in a second. I feel like he would make the chase as the 5 car is objectively a better ride than the 56 car. He didn't have a great chase in real life, but I do wonder if part of that was because he was under a harsher microscope after Spingate and he didn't want to step out of line. I will predict that he finishes around like 9th or so in this version, but I can move him around a bit. Jeff Burton announces before the start of the season that this will be his final season, and everyone already knows who's going to replace him. Burton takes it with decorum and says all the right things to the media, and he ends up having a very forgettable final season, finishing 20th in points and going out with a whimper instead of a bang. Harvick is not as graceful. He's already announced that he'll be moving to Stewart-Haas next season, so he doesn't feel the need to be cordial on the way out. He has a few run-ins with the Dillon boys in the Xfinity Series, and he makes a couple of silver spoon comments. Those obviously don't sit too well with Pop Pop. He gets his third top 3 points finish in his last 4 seasons, but Childress doesn't seem too heartbroken that he's out. Paul Menard holds a top 10 point spot through the first quarter of the season, but a slow summer stretch dashes any hope of a dark horse chase run. He doesn't seem to react too much to all the drama going on with his teammates. Like, does he even know what's going on? Once again, Circle Sport continues to be the mostly irrelevant team, with Landon Castle getting most of the miles this season. However, for 6 races this season, Austin Dillon and Brian Scott run in Childress equipment and get a pair of top 20 finishes, as Dillon prepares for his rookie season and Brian Scott continues to be the GOAT. Things were never the same for old Juan Montoya after that whole jet dryer incident. After going top 5-less in 2012, 2013 was a slight rebound, especially on the road courses and surprisingly the short tracks. Juan had a good track record on the short tracks, but you wouldn't know it. But by August, he would inform Chip that he would be leaving, and by this time next season, he'd be driving an Indy car for Andretti. After a rough start to the season that would find Jamie outside the top 20 after Sonoma again, a runner-up finish at Kentucky starts a bounce-back second half for him, and he manages to climb up to 15th in points by season's end with a win at Talladega in Auburn colors. Things are not going too hot for the 01 cars. You can only go boom or bust so long before you go bust. He regresses hard into a team that is near the bottom of the point standings after a full year of stringing together one-and-done sponsorships, as well as a Jason Leffler memorial after his death in June. The 01 team is dissolved at season's end, and Rudy is released. All right, these goofballs. Where do I even start with them? Let's start with this. This whole situation happened as a result of trying to get Martin Truex into the chase. See, Truex was in a dogfight for the last playoff spot with Jeff Gordon and Ryan Newman. However, Marcus Ambrose was having a down season in 2013. Like, he missed out on his almost guaranteed win at the Glen and therefore wasn't even eligible for a wild card spot. They would have no reason to engineer this cockamamie stunt in order to get someone into the chase who was already mathematically eliminated. So, Spingate doesn't happen in this timeline. Now, at first I thought the 50-point penalty served to Clint Boyer was slapped on after the points reset of the chase, but for some reason they assessed it before the points reset, which ultimately changed literally nothing for Clint. Not sure what the logic was there, but this ultimately means that Boyer's 7th place points finish would probably go unchanged, though like with Truex, without being under probation, he might be more incentivized to push a little harder, so he might be able to bump that up to a top 5 points finish. Now, the 55 car was actually totally unaffected by Spingate at all, as they weren't even in line for the owner's chase. Vickers, who was actually in that race, wasn't even racing for Cup points. So he ended the season with an objectively hilarious minus 50 points. Beautiful. Only MWR. So the original plan for 2013 was to do the same thing that they did last year with Martin, Waltrip, and Vickers splitting the ride. However, Martin was tabbed to drive Tony Stewart's car after Tony Stewart broke his leg. Then Brian Vickers was supposed to ride out the season, but he got blood clots, meaning they had to sign Elliott Sadler to finish out the season. Also, Brian Vickers won at New Hampshire? Wild. Okay, so hear me out. This might be the dumbest part of this whole situation. So, after a year of rumors and poor performance and all kinds of nonsense, Rick Hendrick and Dale Earnhardt come to a deal, and they do something that we almost never see a NASCAR team do. A trade. Hendrick sends Dale Earnhardt Jr. to DEI in exchange for Casey Kane, all of Junior Motorsports, a promise not to start a new Nationwide Series team for the rest of his active Cup career, and a buttload of Dale Jr.'s merchandise money. Also, it is worth noting that Hendrick does try to get Kyle Busch instead of Casey Kane, but Kyle's not too keen on going back to Hendrick, so they get Casey Kane instead. With a reinvigorated Dale Earnhardt Jr. under their roof, he finally gets the monkey off his back and wins the Daytona 500 finally after 15 tries. His dad is there to celebrate with him in victory lane, and one more time, everyone lines up on pit lane to congratulate him. He makes the new 16-car chase and has a strong season, but still gets eliminated in the round of 12. Kyle Busch welcomes his new teammate with open arms, but since he's NASCAR's top heel, he doesn't let Dale have his old number back. That bastard! He's in the chase too, but a disastrous Talladega 2 eliminates him in the round of 12 as well. But next year, he'll have a lot more success. Casey ends up moving to Hendrick, and while he does have a new crew chief and team than he had from real life, I would not be too shocked if he too was eliminated in the round of 12. Though maybe there's a honeymoon period and he gets a little bit higher. Don't worry, I'm not going to eliminate everybody in the round of 12. This would have been the year that Martin Truex would have left MWR to go to Furniture Row, but Truex finally has some stability, baby! He probably stays with Hendrick for the rest of his prime and is a title contender from here on out. He would definitely make the chase with Hendrick Power, and even taking his real-life results into account, he did pretty well throughout the first 2 rounds of the chase. I think that Truex, at the minimum, makes the round of 8 and might even be a Final 4 driver. Austin Dillon finally begins his rookie season, and Dale Sr. would not be a fan of how things went down between Dillon, Childress, and Harvick. We'll get more into what happens with them in a second, but for Austin Dillon, he'd have a decent rookie season, all things considered, being one of only 2 drivers running at the end of every race. Like, rookies don't normally do that. Surely only greatness is coming for our friend Austin, right? As for Harvick, even though Dale would make a strong play to bring him on board with like a 3rd team, Harvick instead chooses to go with a more known quantity and takes Ryan Newman's old ride with Stewart-Haas Racing. However, because Dale is still upset with Childress for booting Harvick in favor of Dillon in his eyes, he offers a technical alliance with the Stewart-Haas team in order to help them get more information about the still fairly new Gen 6 cars. And with his help, or without it honestly, Harvick finally manages to get over the hump and win his first championship. As a side note, how funny would it have been if Ryan Newman would have won the title in 2014? Like, I'm a Harvick fan to the end, but Newman winning in the first season of NASCAR's new point system made to incentivize wins over all else without getting a single win. Mwah! I love chaos. Anyway, Newman basically takes over Harvick's ride and has a modestly successful regular season before becoming the new 2013 Matt Kenseth, coming within 1 spot of ruining everything for NASCAR in the most perfect way. You know, I am just making stuff up for this. I could just... Nah, it's too good to be true. He's still here, and he will be for a few more years. A slight down year by his standards, but the expanded chase would mean that next year, he'd get in just by doing his normal consistent thing. Another rookie joins the fray with young Kyle Larson, and honestly, if he somehow would have made the chase, either with a win at Auto Club, or honestly just 16 more points to get in on points, he could have made some real noise in the chase, as he only had 1 finish outside the top 6 in the first 2 rounds. Rookie Kyle Larson making the round of 8 would be one hell of a statement. Alas, it would have taken a few more years for all of us to learn how good Kyle was, but he would easily be the highest finishing non-chase driver and the Rookie of the Year. Jamie would be in a similar position as his rookie counterpart, just missing out on the chase but having a decent chase that he wouldn't be a part of. So, now comes an interesting question about MWR. If Spingate doesn't happen, where do they end up? Well, I think Boyer keeps his positive momentum going into 2014 and makes the chase either through wins or points. If he had made it, he probably would have been another victim in the round of 12 or maybe the round of 8. Brian Vickers would probably go on to have a fine season at MWR with a couple of top 5s, but ultimately nothing too crazy for him. This is the ride that interests me the most, though, because one of the big fallouts from Spingate was MWR losing Napa as a sponsor. That wouldn't happen in this timeline, and as a result, Chase Elliott would need a different sponsor for when he would make the jump to the Cup in 2015. It is interesting to wonder if the 56 car would have had a better chance to win at Wackett's Glen than the 9. If he did, Ambrose would make the chase instead of AJ Allmendinger. And what's also interesting is that Ambrose would leave the sport and head back to Australia in 2014. So who would come into this car after that? Like, in real life, the candidates to replace him in the 9 car were Sam Hornish and David Reagan, but with MWR being a stronger team by this point, maybe they could make a play for a really big free agent like Greg Biffle or maybe even Carl Edwards? I'm just saying. But that, for now, I think is enough. My voice is going out. I've been recording for almost 2 hours now, and I've got to whittle all this down. But you can see how much one change in the timeline, a massive change, but just one single change, would change all of this. Pretty crazy, huh? See y'all later.